All right, I think we are ready to go. So welcome everybody to tonight's World Changers in Tech event from GERMANTECH in partnership with the WORLDCHANGERS. We are very excited to have you guys all here. Though we are, for those of you who have been to events with us before, we have a little bit improvised situation today because all of the rooms are booked, so we have to use this room, which normally is a co-working space of B-Part. But we're entrepreneurial, so we improvise and we find solutions when we have a challenge. That's what we do. But I think it's super cozy, and also you can hear me well without the mic down. My name is Maria. I'm the managing director of GERMANTECH. We are an ecosystem builder. We build sustainable ecosystems. We work with corporates, startups, and academic institutions. So what does that mean? What do? We do events like this, where we bring together people from different sectors talking about what they experienced, what worked well for them, what didn't work well for them. To just share knowledge, inspire exchange, and knowledge exchange. We work with corporates. We do a lot of entrepreneurship program. We do a lot of executive education. So we bring corporates together, we try to teach them to act and think like startups, and we work with academic institutions where we do lectures in summer schools and stuff like that to teach entrepreneurship, because we think that more people should be entrepreneurs and more people should build solutions and help make the world a better place. That's what we do. And one way to build solutions is definitely at universities. But we also experience that a lot of people coming from universities developing ideas or solutions in universities lack or have challenges afterwards to transfer that into a startup or into a business. So that's what we want to talk about today. And I'm very happy that we'll have a moderator. So I'll hand it over to you, Jack, and the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for coming. I'll intro myself in a bit, but just before then I wanted to read who's in the room. Obviously this is about academia and entrepreneurship. Can you put your hand up if you're an academic? Okay. And of those academics, put your hand up if you're currently a PhD student. Okay. So there's a decent amount of people who are like postdocs beyond. Fun. And if you're of the people in the room, who currently would say that they want to start a company? It's a nice one mix. Great. Has anyone here started a company? Okay. Good. Of the academics in the room, just to read on like disciplines, are who is I guess I'm going to assume everyone is a science academic of sorts. Right, so put your hand up if you're a chemist, biologist, physicist, computer scientist, mathematician, anyone that I've missed, astronomer, something. Okay, that's good. So we've got a really good room. This is a really fun room. People want to start companies, really different fields. I'm really excited to kind of talk more about it. Indulge me quickly before I go to moderation, just to explain who I am. My name's Jack. You'll notice from my accent that I'm British. I started out my career at Imperial College London, where I worked at the Technology Transfer Office, running a life sciences accelerator there, mainly working with kind of PhDs and postdocs. I then moved across to a company called Entrepreneur First, which is based out of London, but now has offices in Berlin, Paris, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangalore. And what we do is we fund people to start companies before they have ideas and before they have teams. So we find smart people that want to start companies who don't necessarily know what it is yet, and we put them in a room, and we give them money, and we give them time, and then we invest into what comes out. It's a fun process. We've been doing it now since 2012. We've got about 150 companies that are worth a collective 1.5 billion. In 2016, we had one of our companies sell to Twitter for reported, I need to legally say reported, 150 million exit, which is the largest ever accelerator backed exit company in European history. And I spend a lot of my time talking to academics and working with them and helping them decide whether they want to start companies. If any of that has been interesting to you, feel free to come and grab me afterwards. But now I want to hand over. Should we go around in this order? And do you just want to introduce yourself, give your background, maybe spend a couple of minutes on it, and just talk.
Yeah, nice to have you all here. My name is Andreas. I'm co-founder of WORLDCHANGERS GmbH, classical German company in the end. My background is actually not that I'm a scientist, but I studied economy with electrical engineering. And I've worked after my diploma as a management consultant for 3.5 years in Germany, mostly based. And after that, I started actually the run-up project that was not under the same name. We call it EnviroPep. And we started with 4 people. The other 3 were all chemists, like you, probably the only one. We started in 2016 with that. We founded the company in 2018. We had an transfer of research, or Forschungstransfer. That is one of the most common pre-foundation funding programs in Germany. It's on the BMWI. BMWI, and then last year or this year we made a seed finance round, and what we essentially do is we actually developed a technology for the purification and modification of biomolecules, especially for peptides. So what are peptides? Peptides are in the end small proteins, so to say. So they build up of amino acids, and one major application for peptides that have been made via chemical synthesis is the pharmaceutical industry, so as an active ingredient for drugs in the end, and therefore you need to purify them in a way. Nowadays they become more and more complex, and you need technologies actually that are capable of reaching all these goals, and we've developed a technology that's the first technology in the end that enables parallel purification of peptides, and that's essentially what we do. Our company has now 8 employees, 7 of them are chemists, 1 is not a chemist, and it's just me. And I'm happy to be in this discussion and to talk with you, of course, as well. Great.
Hi, welcome also from my side. I'm René Mauer. I'm joining you from ESCP Europe. Anybody familiar with ESCP Europe? Thank you. Thanks. Great. So that's actually the European Business School, which means that we are having campuses in Paris, London, Madrid, Torino, Berlin, and Warsaw. We also claim to be the world's first business school, because this year our anniversary is 200 years. So we have a big birthday party coming up at the end of November. And on the Berlin campus of ESCP Europe, I am the professor for entrepreneurship and innovation. And that's where I guess the connection is coming from. So kind of developing entrepreneurship programs, innovation-related teaching activities for all sorts. I'm the academic director of a peculiar executive master program, which is called the Executive Master in Digital Innovation and Entrepreneurial Leadership. I know, bulky term, lots of interesting terms in the title, also an interesting project. And then we are also catering literally to all programs at ESCP Europe, the entrepreneurship and innovation related content. In this school, we have been creating only for the last 2 years our own department, which is called the Jean-Baptiste Say Institute for Entrepreneurship. Jean-Baptiste Say being both the guy who 200 years ago co-founded ESCP Europe, but also the person who actually is a little bit responsible that we're now worldwide using that term, entrepreneurship, quite broadly. So in that context, I'm working now since 2015. and we're expanding our activities on all our campuses. Before that, I was at RWTH Aachen, which is one of the big engineering technical universities in Germany. Spent quite some time there, started there actually building up the Center for Entrepreneurship, and then even at some point in time, even being part of an Exist-Forschungstransfer project myself. So creating or being part of some venture activities. I think what the invitation said when people asked me to come here was that I should also talk a little bit about the fact that I'm researching into entrepreneurial decision making, more specifically entrepreneurial decision making and behavior under uncertainty. And I think the direct connection was that when I at some point in time followed a PhD at Aachen University, I had a pretty naive idea that if I want to research the early stage of technology ventures, that I could look at what the technology that people has in terms of solution categories. And then the only thing that you have to do is find demand outside, so companies and people's needs, that you could describe in some kind of need or demand categories. And then the only thing that we need is a matching algorithm that brings the two together, and ta-da, we are creating all these great tech companies. The naivety brought me into the situation of quickly understanding that that doesn't quite work. When I pretty much came across a concept that's called effectuation, which I've been researching and working on at that point in time, which is the logic of decision making of expert entrepreneurs, more specifically decision making and behavior under uncertainty, so in uncertain situations, which we then have been applying at Aachen University, of course now also at ESCP Europe, and yeah, I'm happy to talk about that more when we get to that. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jack Kratzer. I'm working at the Technical University in Berlin. I'm sharing entrepreneurship and innovation management, and I'm the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship. And I will start there. So we have a Center for Entrepreneurship which takes care of all entrepreneurship activities at TU Berlin, which means support incubation, which means academic teaching, which means MBA courses, which means research. When we speak about incubation, we run 3 incubators in Berlin, 2 at the territory or at the area of TU Berlin and Charlottenburg, and 1 in downtown. At the same time, we have around 30 to 40 teams in our incubators. We only support technical innovations. We are not supporting anything else. We have a lot of startups from TU Berlin doing something else, which is fine, but we are not supporting that. We are really focusing on technical innovations. To give you a number, we have around 30 startups every year. And if I take all startups we created in the past that are still on the market, these startups have a turnover of around 10 billion euro. So it's quite an economic number produced by a technical university. We have many more people approaching us, so we are quite selective in selecting the teams we house in our incubators. We run a master program, which is the most popular master program at a technical university. This year we had 1,300 applicants for 50 places, and that's a master program in innovation management, entrepreneurship and sustainability. And that focus on educating entrepreneurship experts, not necessarily people who found a company. 20 to 30% found a company. Maybe the famous one you might know is Karlbach, that chocolate powder you find at the supermarket, at the entrance of supermarkets normally. That's probably the most famous one. Next to that, I supervised 15 PhD students researching in the area of entrepreneurship. What do we do there? We are looking at entrepreneurship education. Does it make any sense to educate entrepreneurship? Does it help people? Does it inspire people? Does it transfer knowledge to people? Yes, it does, but limited. Not everyone is profiting from that. You need a certain personality in actually getting a founder of a company. There are certain people who do not profit from this education. That's quite for sure. Still, it makes sense to do that because people can select doing it or not. We're researching on user innovation because what we realize is that most innovation, even in the technical field, come from people who are really into this technology. But most of the time, these people are unable to make some business out of that. So what we try to go into the projects to get that out, to get the knowledge out, and to get the people teamed up with other people to get it running, maybe even in a company. We do a lot of research in sustainability. With MIT together, we developed a method of measuring sustainable return on investment. That's extremely important to us because at our incubators, we really look at the sustainable footprint of companies. We want our companies not only to be profitable, we also want them to have some societal responsibility and some environmental responsibility. And that should be measurable also for companies. And it's important for the future. I think future investments orient itself and these measurements on sustainable return on investment. And one topic which I think is very important is authenticity in the future. That means how authentic enterprises are. Authentic in a way people recognize, perceive enterprises. When you want to have the best people working for your company, when you want to attract customers, when you want to hold customers to the company, you have to be authentic. You have to be honest and authentic to the outside. And a lot of companies actually don't consider that and make mistakes there. But in the future, I think nobody wants to work for a company who is not in any way authentic. So that's shortly 4 research themes we do. I founded 2 companies myself in the past. The first one was a company where we were secretly tracking email communication in companies. Unluckily, it was illegal. So we had a lot of management from companies who actually wanted to buy that, but still, of course, illegal. So we stopped that. And the second company was a project management in shipping. So that, for instance, at the Volvo Ocean Race, we were just taking care of the Hapag-Lloyd boat all over the world and providing them with everything necessary during this race. This company is still existent, but I don't have any time anymore to do anything there. So that's my experience. At the moment, I actually would like to invest, but I'm from a conflict of interest not allowed to invest in my own companies by having this job at the university. But maybe in the future I stop and invest. Who knows? Okay.
What an esteemed panel. I'm very excited to have you. It's very fun to have. The problem of not being able to give your money away. A great problem to have. I want to start with a question, maybe you'd be the best position to ask, which is a really simple one, but I think is often quite tricky to answer. What type of academic should start a company? And I'm assuming kind of from your intro that you don't believe all of them should.
That depends heavily on the person. Very anxious person, a very person who, let's say, think about things 10 times, probably shouldn't start a company. And some of personal behavior you cannot change by education. What we can do, we can inspire. What really helps are role models. If we get startups again and again into education so that people see how it works. What also works is teaming people and letting people doing by supervision some work, some prototyping, some business planning. That really, you learn a lot of things, and you might be inspired and you see how it works to start a company. But still, only certain person will start a company. And I think it's also good in education when people realize I'm not the person for doing that, and I better go to a corporate and work there as employee. That's a decision you have to make anyway during your study or after your study. And it's also a good decision to realize that starting a company isn't anything for me. and others realize maybe it's an option not going to a corporate but starting a company. That's what education can provide, next to some soft skills and some techniques we can teach. But that's what we can do. But still it is limited. It's not that someone who is actually not capable to start a company, and we put this person into education in 1 year, and this entrepreneur comes out. It doesn't work.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Particularly, like, I'm interested in, like, if people are sat in this room and they're on the fence, how do they decide? How can they, like, work out with it?
Well, I think from my point of view, first of all, I would say that it is a lot, especially if you talk about tech startups, there is, in my opinion, one really important point about having a good team and really teaming up as early as possible with whatever idea you may have, or whether you just come to some sort of incubator or accelerator and saying, like, I just want to found a company. And I would say then try to team up with others, because I think really in tech you need the team. You won't be able to have all the capabilities by yourself, but still, if I would be asked what is important, I would say some sort of eagerness to get into topics that you have no real background in so far. That is something that you will experience in your early days of being a founder of whatever company there is. You will be confronted with ecosystems, with people you don't know, with situations you don't know, you're not familiar with, and being willing to solve these things, getting good solutions for that, and going forward. I think that's really important, and that should be something that, from my point of view, someone should bring along if you want to start a company.
Yeah, so I would like to disagree a little bit, but my problem is I'm not sure exactly where. I think part of the experience also in Aachen was that, let me start differently. When Facebook came out, I thought it was a very bad idea. Okay, so in that sense, you know, I'm a professor for entrepreneurship and innovation. Come to me asking me if your idea is good, don't do that, right? Or ask me, and if I say it's a stupid idea, go for it, right? You choose. It's a little bit similar to my experiences with people that I ran across, because particularly in that tech entrepreneurship scene, I've come across many people where I would have been going like, oh, very kind of timid, quiet, shy person, not what we all would expect an entrepreneur to be like. And the next thing I do is I meet them at some event, and I see them mingling with, you know, either people that are exactly the opposite like them or similar to them, and they're doing this great job of finding their way, you know, knitting together networks, creating their companies. So I would be very careful just on the basis of, you know, personality of, you know, trying to tell apart people, which I think is something that we have in common in the sense that it's difficult to pick the ones beforehand.
Yeah, but I don't believe that this extrovert people are the better ones. In tech, there aren't. And also research shows that in tech you work a lot with social networks. In tech you are not confronting yourself again and again face to face to other people. And working behind the scenes with technology does not require to be extrovert. So that's, I mean, in the past it was a quality you really needed 10, 20 years ago. I think it has a bit gone nowadays. You don't have to be an extreme extrovert guy anymore.
So I think that's important, this hero idea of an entrepreneur that we would still see on the media, particularly when it comes to the digital tech companies. I think that's somewhat misleading in a way, right? So we shouldn't go down that path. The other point I wanted to mention is we're experimenting heavily at the same institute within ESCP Europe with teaching formats around entrepreneurship, knowing that there's lots of the skill set related teaching formats. We're trying to put more and more focus on what we call either experience-based teaching, or the Paris colleagues call it a little bit more impact-based teaching. What the heck is that? We're actually trying to bring people as close as possible in any teaching format into a situation that will then be most similar to an actual entrepreneurship situation. So it's kind of difficult to make them found their companies. That's actually even possible. I know some programs that are actually doing that. But you know, we bring them into exposure situations where, with ideas that they have been developing, we try then to push them forward so that they're experiencing that uncertainty again that comes together with trying to create something that you're not entirely sure about how it will exactly look like, how it will exactly work, how the process is going to shape up to creating something new in some ways. And we have at least made quite good experiences with people going through the process, not with the people in the middle of the process, because that's usually when they hate it, right? But after the process, or even after the process, then some time spent elsewhere, they start appreciating the set of experiences. And my idea would still be that whoever you are as a person starting into such programs, into one of these activities and teaching formats, you can still certainly kind of develop a certain capacity, competence, uncertainty, coping capability that would at least make the probability higher that you would not feel entirely stressed out if you start the company. Would that?
No, I agree to that, but it is from person to person it's different.
That's true. Yeah.
I think probably something that you should bring along is a certain honesty to what you bring along yourself from a skill set. For example, I would say that you do need someone in your team. If we talk about really like early stage, for example, tech startups, you won't have a sales guy, or most likely you won't have a sales guy with lots of years of experience. So you will need someone who is able to tell what your idea is about in quite simple terms and to convince others that the product is valuable for them. And I think this is a mindset that is, from my point of view, quite difficult for scientists, or many scientists don't necessarily bring this into the game. And you should probably ask yourself in a way, well, this is something that you bring along yourself, or look for someone else who's probably better in that, and join up with people like that.
I think this is a really interesting point, which is, he's kind of brought up a bit, which is, one, we need people to be entrepreneurs where you said you're really eager to learn new things, and they have to grow, and they have to have this ability to take on challenges with sorts of uncertainty and grow. At the same time, some things they're not going to be good at and they should hire in. How do you decide whether one of these things is one of the things that I'm going to learn and overcome and grow into, or how do you decide this is something where I need a co-founder to do this?
Yeah, that's actually a difficult question. I think at least one thing that I personally have to say, because I've not really experienced it myself, but it used to be quite more difficult to convince scientists that it's really necessary to have also someone good with a business background in your team. I mean, it might sound stupid at some point, but we talked a bit about founding programs previous to this session, and earlier it was the case that you were able to get money more or less from state money in Germany, for example, for your idea and building it up. That was before founding a company, where one could say, okay, why do I need a business guy but not even having any sort of company? But I think it's really the right way to say nowadays that you have to start as early as possible with more or less the full team you need to at least found your company and set up everything that's necessary. So from the first point of view, you should have some sort of business skill in your team. And I think much more is I would say, a bit depending. If we talk about soft skills, for example, that's much harder to say that what is missing in your team. I think in tech, you usually, I would say nowadays, in the ecosystems you experience, like if you talk about in many areas about network ecosystem and so on, where even one company is not really working on its own, but rather together with other companies and developing things and research and so on, and therefore you usually should team up with some other people, and it's more difficult actually on this soft skill aspect to realize what is probably missing in your team. But again, probably the only thing that helps is to team up as early as possible to actually find out yourself what you're missing, and then getting this back up somehow.
I mean, I think it's a really tricky thing. The IEF, Entrepreneur First of all, I remember we used to say, this used to be like an official EF slogan, I remember going into, when they went into the Imperial Business School before I worked there, and they said this, was on the kind of like should you have a business person point. They were very, very pro-technical founders. And they used to say you can teach a PhD student how to sell, but you can never teach an MBA student a PhD in machine learning. And there's like a slight asynchronous. So I'd love to hear like your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before that at some point in time I was part of a team that was funded with the same program. And at that point in time, the program actually said there are two phases to the program. In phase 1, no business person, right? So let the scientists alone, do their stuff, and that I don't know, that extra competence can come in later. That's soon enough. And for us, it was really not soon enough because I was entirely overwhelmed with administering the program per se, and then building up the company per se. Trying to spend time on what was very necessary to figure out who is a customer, who pays for the thing, pays for what. What does the product look like? What are kind of design components that we have to think about, not only when it comes to the product but also to the business model. It was just not enough time, so we had to fold the company in the end, right? And that was only after a year, basically, of existence, because that second period was very short. So I think, based on the experiences, partially also based on these experiences, we're currently doing an interesting program together with FU Berlin, actually, which is called InnoBridge. We're taking business students from ESCP. We're taking information science and other students from other programs from FU Berlin. We match them into teams. Then we match them with idea providers from FU Berlin, who actually are in the process of starting a company based on IT from the FU. And then we ask the teams of the students in that InnoBridge program to bring them from point A to point B. And they are in very different stages, and we try to do that and to help them there. And of course, the very important learning experience is somewhat related to entrepreneurial methods and skills, right? So they do think about value proposition design and business model design, about prototyping and all these things, and testing. But primarily, what they need to spend time on is learn interdisciplinary collaboration. I mean, the programs always, the programs, and I've seen more and more stuff popping up going cross programs. But this one, you can really see how much energy needs to go into the fact of, in terms of soft skills, learning that interdisciplinary collaboration. And when I remember back to the times, within Celtech, I mean, there was me, a business person, coming in late, and there was an already established team of a chemist, an electrical engineer, and a physics person, who was the key knowledge holder. And that took a lot of time to kind of get together as a team, mutually and across fields learn from each other. Of course, I needed to train them a little bit in the stuff that's kind of important from business side, which gets particularly bad if you at some point have to tell them what cash management means, particularly if you have to cut costs. But you also, as a business person, cannot not care about the technology. Right? So that's what I find amazing about your story, right? They have this very plastic way of talking about the proteins, right? And I just read this exist thing on my way here, kind of an exist report, which also used a very nice, I think, fisherman's analogy to talk about the mechanism that is behind your technology. This is exactly the stuff that we're trying to add the value from the business school side. But that also requires quite some time and effort to bring these teams together and learn from each other, to talk to each other. I sometimes tell the business school students, you have to get used to a translation job, or you have to become better at a translation job. Tech business, business tech.
Yeah. Do people in the room know what people are talking about when they say exist? If you shake hands, do you want to just explain what exist is?
Yeah, of course. Exist in the end is, like I already said, it's a program from the Bundesministerium für Wirtschaft und Energie, so the German Ministry for Economics and Energy. There are more or less 3 different programs that they offer. One is called Gründerstipendium, and one Forschungstransfer, and they're actually in a way different from what they are targeting, and in a way how you handle things. I think the Gründerstipendium is something that is more frequently used. It's in the end a bit easier to apply for and to successfully generate, and you more or less work on your own team up in more or less like 12 months. And the Forschungstransfer, the transfer of research, is more of a thing for really tech-related ideas that need some more time to market in the end. So you need much more time in a way to actually get along. Usually they have, you have an academic institution in the background that actually applies for this program, and then you are, as the future founder probably, you're just employed at this academic institution, and you develop this idea, more or less the idea to the market. So the end of the program is more or less supposed to be more or less the time you need to market it. In some ways that does not really work out, but that's usually the idea behind it. And as I said, you usually nowadays have a team of 4, where you usually have like at least one person with some business background and know-how is in the end where the idea comes from. And the difference is mainly in the Forschungstransfer thing that, for example, the IP and everything belongs more or less to this academic institution. So this is, for example, something if you get much more money than for the Gründerstipendium, but the downside is in the end the IP. So if you think like you can go along with the money that you get from an Gründerstipendium, then you're probably better off in saying, now then I hold everything I need from intellectual property point of view, and instead of going for the transfer of research. But there you have more time, you have more money, you have more human resources on your idea, working on it, and there are some other topics arising from that then.
What's the best way, anyone can answer this, what's the best way to navigate the grant landscape in the kind of funding landscape in Germany? Because it is a little bit complicated, and it is a little bit inaccessible, and I think for people in the room it would be super useful to go into tips.
I think, starting with that, I think actually that the disadvantage in Germany is that you have really a small track you're able to go, from my point of view. Because if you're having an idea that is really time consuming, where you know that you have some more research to do and so on, then there is not much apart from Forschungstransfer in case you are not founding out of a big corporate, for example, or you're backed by people you know who have a lot of money or whatever, then this is more or less the only option to go, and I know that the success rates are quite low, and this is, from my point of view at least, some drawback in Germany, that there's really a small track you can take, and that does not end after the Forschungstransfer, but that goes on in a way. If you need more money afterwards, if you think like, for example, in biology or chemistry, if you think about drug, if you want to actually you have a drug target that you actually want to work with, or other sort of research where you need long time for prototyping and so on, then this is the only choice, because if we talk about venture capital or other things that are more market related, that look more on KPIs, on whatever fast return of the investment in the end, these companies are not really in the German market that would back such companies that would do quite independent research from researchers that are not known in a way. So.
Andreas, can I ask you what you're comparing it to? If you're saying it's a narrow path as compared to where, for example?
I would say that, for example, thinking about really early stage venture capital, for example, would be a good comparison. So actually a company that has a lot of money, or a decent amount of money, that it wants to invest into really scientists, like PhDs or whatever. If you have graduated as a master, you probably make quite good research work, that is all you have. You have a background, for example, in some sort of academics, and now you have the idea to commercialize this idea. So this, most of the time, what it comes from. The idea to commercialize this, and I guess without having good context or the money somehow next to you, you won't be able to get this sort of money in Germany. Without, I mean, you don't have anything. If you have proof of principle, you don't have IP, most likely. At least you filed for some sort of IP, for a patent or whatever, but you have nothing more than that. You have no revenues, and you tell people the prototype or the whatever trials I have to do will last 2 years. I guess you won't get any money. I'm sorry to say that.
Probably true, and there's this ongoing debate that the venture capitalists, particularly kind of early stage, with kind of technology that needs lots of development, is a little bit of a problem in Germany. On the other side, I mean, of course, I'm usually telling the students a more positive story, but it's not that I'm lying in that sense. I mean, if you take Exist Gründerstipendium, I mean, there are, I think the max is 130,000 euros coming your way from the German government without any equity that you have to give back.
Yeah.
If it happens, the company afterwards, nice. If it doesn't happen, I'll go and do something else.
Yeah.
I mean, it costs nothing from the founder's perspective, which I actually find nice. When we're talking about Forschungstransfer, still similar, I believe, just that we're talking about 500,000 to 1 million. Right, that comes in over this. So, and then of course we have this funny German ecosystem. I've just been in San Francisco, and of course if you talk to people there, you know, they would go like, "That's crazy. You know, why would you spend tax money on?" Of course, they give you that story, right? But we have this thing, and it's kind of running nicely. So in that value chain of investments, we do have another element, which is high-tech Gründerfonds. At least one, again, state-funded, something that a venture capitalist in the valley is going like crazy about, hair on fire if they hear that. But they have been quite successful now. I mean, I was also very skeptical about it when they started, but by now they have kind of reached a pretty nice growth in size, and they have been producing quite nice results with stuff that has gone through their process. And then you see all kind of seed funds that are, you know, more in the regions, more regional seed funds. Again, not purely private, for sure not, right? So kind of definitely having some kind of public money in there. But it seems to be a little bit more our system, right? And that system, at least in 2019, you know, I wouldn't actually look at it as too narrow or so narrow.
And probably coming to this point, the high-tech Gründerfonds is invested in our company, and we also have money from the Investitionsbank Berlin, for example. That's actually this regional program here in Berlin. And I can say that we were quite early for the high-tech Gründerfonds when they actually gave money to us early this year, after 1 year of existence, after 3 years of research. And I can say they would have never invested in us 2 or 3 years ago. So it was quite early for them. We had, if one would ask what were the reasons they invested in us, that is because we have quite really promising projects going on, pilot customers that gave really good feedback and so on. But we had really very low revenues. We had IP, but that is what we have right now. Still not granted, of course, but in very quite long run IP process. And that's the things they look for. They want to have first revenues or first successful results. If you think about clinical trials or prototyping, whatever, you would need to have good partners, and this is something you won't have. So, like you say, of course, it would be good if you have like some sort of accelerator or incubator, whatever, who says like, okay, I get 50% of your company, and you get your money to start off from the scratch, from nothing more or less, but your idea of doing it. This more or less where I would agree that it's not our ecosystem that we do have, and probably a German founder would say never, if you think like, because it's just, you would compare it to some other guys and say like 50% equity, that's ridiculous. But at least you get money from someone without having anything to prove by yourself. And that is something that is hard to get from my point of view in Germany, not only in Germany, but also in
We have to say in the last 10 years, the situation of investment improved.
Yeah, a lot.
Really
I
significantly
totally agree.
improved. We have a lot of business angel investing, we have a lot of private investors investing, next to all this public scholarships and funds where you can raise money. The point is the amount of money. Up to $1 million, it shouldn't be any problem. So you can go first to that Access Scholarship, and then after, if you have a decent product and you have the first customers, certainly some investor will give you up to $1 million. The point is, some technology requires more time and requires more money. And some of the startups also underrate the amount of money they might need for marketing. It's nice to have a nice product, but if nobody knows about it, it doesn't help anyone. So many young companies underrate the amount of money they would need for customer relationship, building customer relationship, and having all this marketing done to attract customers. In this way, a lot of companies are still underfinanced in Berlin because the higher amounts of money is difficult to reach. And in this way, I completely agree that there is some gap. There's some technology, it might be chemistry, it might be medical equipment. There's certain technology which needs a bit longer to develop to a fully fledged product which can be brought on the market. And that gap is still existent. When you have these public institutions just trying to fill this gap, but look at this very selected cases who receive this money. So many companies who do not receive the money. And that's still a problem. Therefore, sometimes I would suggest to someone having such product, just go to America.
That's actually what here, you probably don't go that far, but for example, you do have, we here in Germany, for example, or here in Berlin, we have, for example, one more or less startup idea coming from Charité. They moved to Switzerland. But yeah, I would say, as many people are from the tech area, I think one point about business angel is still also in Germany, that this is something where you need expertise as a business angel. Or of course as a VC, the same counts. You actually have to have some sort of investment manager who knows actually about chemistry or physics, about whatever kinds of things that you are doing. And I mean, therefore it is some sort of a special field that you're in there. I mean, if you're doing tech, if you do software, if you do hardware, things like that that are more common, then it's quite much easier, or in a way easier. It's not that the money's not lying on the streets, but it is still a bit hard from my point of view, because yeah, also from an investment perspective, there is some know-how missing in a way, and a bit of money still missing from my point of view, which should never discourage anyone of doing this and or applying all these funding programs, because there are a lot of programs, definitely.
There's a little bit of there's an underlying assumption here that if you take the same kind of German startups, tech startups, you bring them to San Francisco, they get money thrown at them, right? And I'm kind of struggling with that. I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. Because I mean, there's this venture capital path. And in venture capital, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, venture capital, we talk so often about venture capital, it's a tiny phenomenon of entrepreneurship, right? Yeah. Very, very, very few companies across the globe actually get venture capital money. Who's familiar with venture capital in the room? Okay, so it's kind of it's risk investment where the company gives money to into startups, into ventures, and then they have to bring back the money, and not only once but multiple times, after anything between 7 and 10 years. So kind of telling them we have this great technology, but it will just take a while to develop, and then even more to market that makes them usually already very nervous. I think what's kind of interesting to also understand is how do we finance that innovation gap, right? So there's a technology developed, obviously at the universities in bulk, right? So that's basically the job of the universities, right? Knowledge, technology, engineering results, so forth that are developed, and then what we're kind of I think underrating as well is then the distance between that development to the actual successful establishment of that as an innovation in a market where it's sold as a product to another entity giving money for that. That's usually underestimated because it's wider than many people would think it is. And the question really is, how do we finance that innovation gap? Right, so one of the answers now was it should probably be some sort of early stage VC. The thing that we've been discussing heavily in Aachen as well, even at the school there, and then together with people in Eindhoven and Leuven, places that were close from Aachen, the Netherlands and Belgium, is that there's probably that there's probably a very clear incubation task with the universities. Right, so they have to come up with sophisticated resources that helps them within the university to reach a certain gestation phase, where then a venture capitalist or an exist program or something can actually step in. Right, so I think that's a discussion that needs even further development, because we always showed our tech entrepreneurs in Aachen that they were always complaining, we need more money to get XYZ machine. And we said, we don't think so. You just have to go somewhere in that RWTH Aachen space, because we have all the machines. And not only once, we have them all. They're standing in some offices, they're standing in some laboratories. You just have to go and get access to it, try out the stuff that you need it for, and then come back with the results. Right? So there's, I think, a very important incubation job to be done by the incubating technical universities and institutions.
Yeah, we do that. I mean, we have 2 laboratories in chemistry for development. We have founding islands so that the teams stay at the faculty, at the institution, to use all this machinery, all this laboratory stuff they need. Of course, we do that, we use that. The point is, a university has 3 major assets. That's doing research, and research expresses itself in publications, not in patents, not in startups. We have to do teaching, and teaching expresses itself in students finishing their study and going on a labor market. That's also a kind of knowledge transfer. And we have this transfer system in actually creating startups, maybe patents, licenses, and so forth. The third thing is a bit difficult for universities, and a lot of people are resistant because it's something new, which came in the last 10-15 years. It's a new asset. We have to serve people in starting up a company, which all ever means we have. And that of course clashes with the classical disciplines of using these laboratories for teaching and using these laboratories for research. And that's the problem we are actually still facing in Germany, that on a legal point of view we have this asset, we have to serve this asset. But on a reality point of view, there's still a lot of resistance and old kind of thinking at universities, that only teaching and research is a responsibility of universities, but not transfer. And that's the point where we are. And then I'm fighting now 10 years at technical university to get a culture done. That's the third asset. It's as important as the other 2 assets. But still, there's a way to go.
My question to you, speaking as someone who worked for a technology transfer office and then left to go to an early stage VC that invests in people before they have an idea and before they have a team, to kind of do the work that I was doing internally, is, you're right, universities have been around for kind of the best part of the millennia in Europe. Business schools have been around for about 200 years. Technology transfer has been around for a very short period of time. 80% of technology transfer offices around the world is running. Why do it within universities? Why, like, as the chair of an entrepreneurship department, why should there be an entrepreneurship department in the university? Why not just let universities do research and then have separate organizations, whether it be GERMANTECH, whether it exist outside of universities, that don't have this weird conflict of interest within this political organization, where they can kind of do that way?
It would work. You need direct access to the institutions and to the projects done in the university. No external organization can ever do that. We have around 80 professors being founding insiders and working together with us. So we know what projects they do, we know all people in their projects, how far they are, how far maybe a patent might come out. So we are really close to the research done at the university, no outside organization can do that. In a way, you are right. We need both. We need inside some supporting institutions, maybe incubator, business coaches, people who decide who might apply for Access scholarship or not, people who might go to these projects and speak to these postdoc students or doctoral candidates. That's necessary, but we might need some institutions outside who might really, on a commercial way, dealing with startups coming out of the university. Actually, you would need both sides.
What would you say is your unique selling point?
What was the entrepreneur first? The moderator will come.
Am I not supposed to answer?
No, definitely. I can answer if you don't mind. I think for me, it's all about incentive alignment, and universities ultimately they have all these really complicated things. It's very hard. If you're a PhD student in a lab, you have to write papers to make your lead professor look good and do that, and then your professor has these other things, and then you're often like hired in because there's this funding attached to it. It's all very complicated. Whereas if you're a company and a VC or an investor or something external, you get given money. You need to make that company big. If the company doesn't survive, that's it. That's the only metric, is like how big and good the company is. Where often I would say the size of the company is directly correlated to impact. If you look at the biggest science companies that are coming, we're a science week, if the biggest science companies that are coming out of universities in the world, the biggest one is probably like Ginkgo Bioworks, came out of MIT, and that's like come out into the American space. It's the reason why it's the most famous is because it's the biggest, it's raised money, it's gone through it went through Y Combinator, which is a traditional venture capital accelerator. If you look to traditional technology transfer, it's very hard to find like very big similar examples.
Yeah, I mean that's the big bias again, right? I mean that's really something that I learned very quickly at Aachen. If I was teaching entrepreneurship there, and our so my Brettels institution there is called Business Administration for Engineers and Natural Scientists, right? So the target audience of the chair was non-business students. We still had business students in there because they wanted to go deeper into entrepreneurship, but let's say half of the people were future engineers and natural scientists. And if I went there and said like, hey, welcome, this is Introduction to Entrepreneurship, who's going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg? What did they do? What do you think that the people in the room do? Silence. Worse. But there was silence because they left. Right? Boom, out of the door. And then I talked to them, and when I talked to them I said, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, Tesla people, Musk, that's, what are you talking about? I'm going to Bosch or Siemens, that's period, right? And it changes a lot if you tell them, yeah, we know, that's kind of the big shiny Forbes magazine and whatever phenomenon, but actually let me bring in Peter, and Peter has created this interesting company with 800 people just in front of the doors of Aachen University, somewhere in the woods. When you're trying to go to the Eifel, you already think there's nothing else coming. There's this company just there. It's a startup out of the university. 800 people, not gigantic, but pretty big. And what are they doing? Building on operations research, algorithm stuff. They're running the entire operations of Delta Airlines on the Atlanta airport. You look at what? Out of Oberforstbach, close to Aachen? How is that possible? Right? That's the interesting examples, right? That's the role models that people can then look at and say, yeah, okay, that's something that obviously if that person can do that, let me check if I may be another person of creating a 800, 200, 150, maybe 20 people company, because it may be more of a niche thing, but it could still be an interesting company, even if it's only the very successful engineering office businesses that have a very certain expertise, building kind of a reasonable company size around that, but not trying to become Uber. I mean that's kind of the problem with the big growth story that I'm always kind of at least having troubles with at times.
Yeah, and we have to say, if I see the portfolio of our startups, 95–97% stay rather small. Then we speak about this engineering office, we speak about companies with 10 or 20 employees. And if you speak to those people, most of them don't want to grow. They are happy with what they have. They have their own company, that's their own baby. They wouldn't accept venture investments or whatever to grow. They have their income, which is a nice income if you have 20 employees and you have an engineering office, and they're happy. But if you count up how many employees they have, this 95% have many more employees as one or two or three big ones we have created. So I wouldn't underrate it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense being self-employed, and that's the entire sense of starting up a company. That does not necessarily mean to grow all the time and to have 800 people of a company in the end of the days. If you are happy with 20, it's fine. Then we have reached our goal, and you have reached your goal.
I think it's a super interesting topic. I want to open it up to the floor. Is there any questions in the room? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give 3 minutes to think of questions whilst I ask this next one. Cool. So we've looked there at 2 different types of kind of companies. Ones which want to stay small. Ones which want to grow really big. Cost of growing really big is that sometimes you fail. Sometimes it becomes very tricky. It's very hard. The upside is that you get huge amounts of impact. If you're staying small, you get a moderate sized amount of impact, but you're potentially happier and it's the right person. Andreas, as the business person, how are you weighing this up in terms of what is your optimal growth trajectory?
First of all, I would say that probably as a role model, like a Mark Zuckerberg or something like this, would probably not really work for your as a perspective for a tech company, because you are talking deep tech, I would call it now. So something that is not as scalable as, for example, software. There it might be a good goal, and he's made quite a successful way. A lot of these tech startups from Silicon Valley and all around have made an impressive way, but that is certainly, first of all, not achievable for many companies, and it's a really bad role model for deep tech companies, because your time to market and so on, the scalability is just not even close to comparable to something like this. And I think probably it's also an advantage, I think, in Germany, that you're quite happy with some decent growth in what you do, and I think that also comes a bit in how successful you are and how well you perform and what actually companies and so on you get involved in and what is possible for you. That wouldn't be something that I would initially think about. I think we have a bit of both in all of us. It's some sort of a discussion probably at some point, because it means risk all the time. That is something that no one can actually deny. That is just not the road of Facebook or whatever. I don't want to compare it, but that was not really a paved road that at all the points that growing is just the way to get to success. But you have rather to think what you're doing, what you're good in doing, and finding good solutions and actually going forward from that point. And that might be investing in new markets, investing in new employees, and growing as fast as you can. This is something that you have to do in a way if you're involved in software, which can most likely be easily copied. But it is something that might not be necessarily important if you're into some deep tech thing where you have probably patents that will secure your position for 20 years, where you have probably a B2B business with only a few customers. That is more or less the area that we are in. So really, overseeable amount of possible customers, of market and so on, and you would be able to really grow like a hockey stick into this market and really growing out of nothing.
Cool. So, questions in the room? There's one in the back.
So it's really interesting having a discussion. You can really feel the expertise that you have. And you've talked a lot about things that you should do, but is there any advice that you shouldn't do or you should avoid at all costs?
When it comes to
If you were looking to be spinning out your research into a business? It could be grants to avoid because it's too cumbersome. It could be
I would say one could turn it around in a way, but I think something that someone, probably especially as a scientist, something that one might actually be in a way prone to is saying, I have a lot of research background, I know a lot, I've really deep knowledge in the area I was involved in. I've read lots of papers. I know about anything, the technical advantages and disadvantages, and thinking from that point of view, now you know everything to actually put your product or service on the market. And this is actually definitely not the case. It's definitely not the case that someone could just immediately start out from, you probably make an impactful research paper and so on, and think, now I've reached whatever the level I need to actually market a product. That is just not the case. It's just what you need is really a proof from customers, from potential customers, a product market fit. That's now the business term in a way, probably. That's relevant. So that's something that I would say, and where I would say that is probably something that scientists might not necessarily always have in mind. So really go out and speak to others and not say like, I want to go for, I know everything and I know what are the advantages of my product. And so you know as well.
Cool. I would probably add that you shouldn't, I mean, there's this idea of persisting in entrepreneurship, right? So stick with the idea. You will have to, change it multiple times, and you should be really your biggest fan. But I think it's also a problem if you get this unhealthy attachment to that one project that really has to become successful now, otherwise your entire life is screwed, right? And I've seen a couple of people coming from the universities, maybe with some kind of dislike against working in a corporate structure, or really being a big fan of the development that they had, and where that clinging to the thing, led to the point of what from a research perspective we probably would call overcommitment, right? At some point in time. So always have multiple paths in front of you, where that one that you're following, right, is one that you're now exploring, and of course also with all the capacity that you have at a certain point in time. But don't be alternative less lacking or whatever that term would be.
Thank you.
Should we go this one then now?
So are there any benchmarks in terms of how equity shared between science people and the business people? I know this might be a touchy subject, but I come from software. Traditionally we see corporate route, and if there's two co-founders, they're equally split generally. But I'm really interested in how, say, deep tech startups equity sharing expectations generally go.
Yeah, of course. There is the standard answer, probably it depends on what you're doing and so on. And what I must say, that I've experienced that scientists tend to the point, the transfer of research has this problem in the end, that in many cases you have scientists with a background in the technology, with many years sometimes of background in the technology, and they are very much backward looking in the end, which is okay in the end, because if you start to found a company, this is actually the latest point where you actually talk about shares in the first place, equity shares. And then most of the time you have these scientists that have long backward experience with what they did, and you have probably some business person involved with really much less effort put into it right now. But this person will most likely not think the same way. That person will think forward looking and saying like, we want to go somewhere together. And we saw really teams that split up because of these things. So I think rather not be too strict in a way. I think it is the right point to say like, okay, we have to look back as well. We know this idea comes from some sort of scientist who has worked, who has actually brought us to this point right here, but also to think the other way around, of saying that it's quite a request. My answer would just be, it is okay to have a bit more as the scientist, as the person, than know-how holder in the end, but try to not actually split your team at some point like this because of equity shares. And I've seen that. That is, unfortunately, it's human in the end, but that is something that really splits up teams in quite early stage, and this is something that you will never ever hear.
I mean, this is a problem that we face all the time in entrepreneurs, because we get people in, often scientists. We do get some people from business schools in. I was lying when I said that we hated all of these, and we get business people in as well, and they come in, and we say, how do you divide up equity? And the answer that we give is always the same, which is it should be 50-50. And if you're the scientist that holds the knowledge, you should find someone that's worth 50%. And if you don't find someone that doesn't want it, don't go with it. And they're like, don't compromise. Like equity, seems, I think, especially if you come from an academic background, seems really complicated. But it's a really actual simple equation you can do to work out, which is, if I'm giving away 50% of my equity to something, or if I'm giving equity away for investment or for technology transfer support or anything, if I give away 50%, do I get more than that back? And you just need to take on a co-founder that more than doubles the valuation of your company. So it makes it twice as good. And if it's more than twice as good, then it makes sense. It's a good deal.
Of course, that's always before the fact, right? So that,
yeah. The thing that you then do to get rid of the before the fact thing is there's something called vesting, which is where you unlock equity as you go. And if someone turns up, signs a contract, and then disappears off after 2 weeks, they don't take any, and you can set it in milestones.
Maybe one distinction also, I mean, if there's business running already, that's a little bit of a different story, right? So if money is being made on something, that's also a little bit obviously a sign of being later stage. That's a little bit of a different story. But if there's zero economic value created, I'm very much in line with the gentleman here, knowing that in our similar case, we spent an insane amount of time discussing that topic. Time that could have gone into product development or meat development, right? Insane, ending up with an equal spread.
And the most important thing is that you have a setup of a team which fits perfectly. So you don't need anyone who is not really needed in a team. So the team shouldn't be too big to be effective and efficient. An equal split is perfectly, if you have the right people in the team, then you should go for an equal split. It makes sense because everyone will profit from that. And splitting up is the worst that can happen because nobody is profiting from that.
There's a question here.
Yes, Jessica from Canada. I deal with researchers who have brilliant ideas, and there's a solution for every disease out there. So it's very hard for them to focus on one thing and commit and really take it far. How do you coach somebody like that?
It's funny, we were just running this InnoBridge program with FU Berlin, and we're just in that phase where the students met the idea providers, and then the students come back also excited about the technology, and in the mini pitches that they give about the technology, they all go like, and this is a great solution and it can be applied everywhere. And we go like, yeah, that's exactly the bad news. Right? Because it's exactly that problem, right? You need to focus on something, and then on customer segments or on a certain industry, a certain vertical, whatever. And the question is, of course, on what, right? And that's not easy to answer. I mean, it's absolutely clear that it's not. You cannot really tell which one is the perfect way to go, right? I think it has to do a lot with testing, right? You have to go into a testing mode, and eventually it comes down to where's your hunch? What do you think? You as one person or maybe as a team, where do you think, just from the interaction that you had so far, where do you believe now today there may be the highest probability of actually getting some traction, right? And then go and test quick, cheap, right? And If it works, congrats. If not, what's the next one? I think that's the kind of mindset that you have to bring people in, but definitely do not go down the path of let's explore everything at the same time, because that's just too expensive and takes too much time. That might.
We do this expert workshops. So we take this project, invite experts around and discuss over hours which way to go best for that certain product or process. That at least selects a few ways you might explore, and it takes away the whole broad thing you could do, because that doesn't work. I completely agree. You cannot explore everything. So you have to make a selection of a few possibilities and to explore those possibilities with customers, with potential customers. And then to make a selection when you're really early in the startup phase, only one thing you should go first, because you have to get one thing running before actually exploring other steps. That's very important.
But just to add, I would say that really probably method could also be just I don't know if it's just individuals that actually aren't really aware what to choose, but you probably make them team up and find actually the one thing that everybody agrees on. Like, okay, this is the way to go, and others say like this is the way, and this and that, and so on. You somehow get into this really very distinct point where everyone agrees on it. Probably that could also be an option of saying, okay, this is actually what we go for. Because on the other hand, I can just totally agree. You have to really have a really good focus, otherwise it won't work.
Cool. There's a question here, then there's a question there.
Yeah. So, I try to be realistic, and also might just sound a little pessimistic as well. But then you're just talking about the bright stories, right? So I'm sure there are many startups which fail. Like the thing is that I heard 90% of the startups fail. My question is, where do these people go? Are they absorbed in other places, or like okay, you invest yourself into something and then it fails, which is fair, but then does that person value in some other market, or this is something that I really want to know?
It depends when you fail. I mean, if you have an access scholarship of 130,000 euro in the first year, and the most likely cases is the team is breaking up. That's in the most cases the reason why companies fail. Then it doesn't matter. I mean, you didn't invest anything, you didn't lose anything, you just go to have another job. And if you're an engineer or a natural scientist, it shouldn't be any problem to find a job in Germany. Some go for another startup, but most go then classically to a corporate or to a company working. So that's most of the cases. If you fail in later stages, then it of course gets more risky for you. You have some investments, you might have some debts, and you have a history of startup, of time being in a startup of maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Then it gets more difficult to go back to the classical labor market and find a job. But still, I think in towns as Munich or Berlin, the market is open for such people who failed with a startup, and you will get a new job here if you are well educated. I wouldn't worry about it. Actually, that wouldn't stop me starting up a company, because if you are well educated in a very flourishing village town as Berlin, you will find a job without any problems. At least I guess so. I think.
No, I mean when we folded the company in 2011. I'm not sure whether it was still maybe it was still a little bit different in the sense that if you heard people talking, there was this kind of prejudice that particularly in Germany, if you come with a failed startup, that's not really looking good on your CV and stuff like that. And then you could see my physics colleague, right, from the startup, actually deciding that he needs to quit his implication with the startup and then go off and find a job. And he had never been working in a company before. He had never studied business. The only thing that he had been doing was doing his physics master, hadn't even finished the PhD, just went into the startup, and he was immediately hired into a project management position with a big tech company in Germany. right away. That was very surprising to all of us, but I think it was, to me, it was kind of a very strong signal of times probably changed a little bit, right? Because that's they actually valued that stuff. They said, "Oh, cool! You did that. You did all that stuff. You went through the whole process. You probably learned a lot. You know, that usual thing that people then connect with that, and which you would not have expected to be also kind of diffused like that in the German industry, German world like that." But I think that's changed a lot right now. So I think it's not a problem, you know, trying that out. Of course, with, you know, in a decent way, right? You know, ethically sound, you know, way, failing with a company. I think people have become more and more aware of the fact that obviously, if you want to have great startups, great and successful startups, we need a lot more tries at creating successful startups, out of which many fail. That's just the equation that we need.
Cool. I think let's go with our final question, which is that, and then I know there's other people that want it in the room, but we'll be hanging around here afterwards. But yeah, what's the final question?
Well, it's a question and also a comment. I think, well, this is the Berlin Science Week, but we have only touched superficially anything related to science, in the sense that I think in the technology transfer process, there's always something missing. The thing is, what we have talked about, it touched a lot like the startup environment and the kind of things we discuss when we go to start meetings. But I think when you go to scientific projects, especially you have other scientists here, it's not so easy to detect how successful a scientific project would go as a company. And well, also from my experience, I've also worked as a technology transfer consultant and so on with companies. It's hard to know when a technology is still not well developed if this is going to become a profitable project, right? And especially because you have more background on the business part, maybe you could tell us, especially for people who might be interested in developing a company, how can you assess this problem of knowing at an early stage how could I do, or what should I do with my idea or with my project? Because at an early stage, as you said, no, costs might go high. If you go from a tier 6 or 7 up to 9, costs usually increase exponentially. And how to deal with this, and how can you come to a point you decide, okay, this might be a good idea or not? Or in your experience, how can you face this problem?
That's a very easy answer. You can't.
It's very difficult. It's the same with patents. I mean, you normally lose when you apply for all patents which would be available at a university. Because most of the patents don't increase in value, but you have to pay for holding the patents. So it's the whole sum. You make a minus if you apply for all patents possible. The point is, it's very hard to assess. What we do is we really get close to the professors running this research projects. And those professors have an affinity for starting companies and getting some patents or startups out of it. So, and this is affinity, we trust the knowledge of the people working on that and trust the knowledge of the professor who might be able to assess. We even have the rule at TU Berlin, if the team at this institute is believing that it will be a success, we apply for a patent. Otherwise, we wouldn't. If the people doing that believe that it will be successful, we will go for a patent and hand them over the patent for starting up a company. So we are really trusting the people doing the projects. Not all people, but we have a set of 80 professors we are trusting when they say that will be commercial successful on the market. We believe that and we go for that and support that. That's the only way you can do. And of course, we might be wrong several times, but the success rate might be slightly higher, but just flipping a coin, I guess. It's difficult, you're right.
probably adding from my point of view, I think one should probably look in, for example, how do investment companies actually evaluate exactly this point, what you're talking about, like early stage VCs, probably you can comment on that as well. But it is more or less like you have more or less 3 streams that actually give you some sort of information. You have to talk to potential customers, or that someone talk about having projects. Some of them are third-party funded, or at least involved on third-party companies that you could actually talk to, where this would be something of relevance for them. And apart from that, like you said already, also just experts. I mean, if you have no idea yourself, talk to external experts. Not only people involved, but external experts. I mean, nowadays in a quite globalized world, you would be able, or even in Europe, in Germany, you will have some sort of expert that is not involved in the research topic you're involved in, that would be able to comment on that. Of course, sometimes it's not something you will get for free and not something that you will get instantly, but there are actually ways to at least increase the idea whether this is something that would work out for you.
My colleague Davide Sola, an Italian guy who, funnily enough, is professor on the UK campus in London, he would say, do not listen to experts unless they are coming from a potential customer area, right? Because that's kind of tricky. If they're not involved in any way, if you cannot ask a commitment from them, then it goes back to my initial example of, ask me back in 2000 something if Facebook was a good idea, right? I'm going like, nah, right? So I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant with that, asking people if X, Y, Z from their expertise is something. I mean, are you a professor?
Yeah, no, scientist.
But you're a scientist, so I guess you are an expert in whatever you do, right? How many? And the people that you know, that you have in your close network, are probably the ones that are the next best at knowing what is going on in that, at least, technology field.
Yeah,
right?
but the problem is, where my question was pointing at is, usually as a scientist, well, I'm an entrepreneur now, so it's a bit different, but as a scientist you might have a clue about how technology might develop, but the question if this is profitable or not is not an easy question for a technical specialist, because this is another different kind of knowledge you need. And the problem is usually on the business side, people might not even able to understand what you're talking about. And I think this is exactly what I meant when I said there's something missing in the middle, because it's really hard to come from a very technical point of view, from a technology or physics or whatever, and then go to the technical knowledge into the business development.
True. Yeah, so I think then to answer that, I think there are definitely methods, on kind of business-based methods, and then also entrepreneurship-based methods that you can actually train and get trained in. I think that's something that is on the market, so to speak, right? So that's what we do in InnoBridge, for example, right?
It's a service.
Even as a service, yes. I mean, at FU, it's basically a service, even a free service to these idea providers there, in a way, right? But still, I mean, you're the kind of content expert in that, and still you would not be able to know ex ante, out of the 5 ideas that you have, let's pick that one, because let me quickly do the business stuff, and I clearly know that this is the one that I should go for. That's not the situation that you're facing when you're in an early stage technology venture situation.
I completely agree. I think it's a great question to end on, which is like this difficult thing of, if we're looking at being an academic going into entrepreneurship, there is going to be what we started out with, which is entrepreneurship is ultimately doing something you're completely unqualified to do. And I think you will be. I think it's been really interesting, like hearing how you came in and offered commercial insights to certain entrepreneurs, and kind of how you're working within universities to train people up as well. The answer that I would give you as the kind of VC was, you need a commercial co-founder. EF will happily fund you and give you a commercial co-founder if you'd like to come chat to us afterwards. I think with that we'll end. Thank you so much for listening to a really engaged talk. Hope to chat to you afterwards.